Have you been looking for a Taekwondo podcast with qualified people who know what they're talking about, who help you keep up with everything going on in the Taekwondo world? Well, you found it. This is the Taekwondo Podcast. Taekwondo news, competitions and other events, training and sports science, keeping the fans, coaches, and high-performance athletes up to date with the latest news and trends on Olympic Taekwondo. Let's do this. This is the Taekwondo Podcast. And here's your host, César Valentim.
Hello and welcome to the Taekwondo Podcast. We're a podcast based out of Austria in English language for everyone out there who likes Taekwondo. In this episode, we talk with Coach Don Lewis about transgender athletes. Welcome to our podcast. I'm Coach César Valentim, and this week with me is Don Lewis. Hi, Don. How are you?
I'm very good, César, and thank you very much for inviting me onto the show.
Yeah, we have an interesting topic to discuss. You are a data guy. I like to see your Facebook and social media reports. It's very useful insights. It helps my job a lot to follow your analysis and your data sum ups that you do. Very good information summaries that are useful for all of us. But for most people out there who don't know who you are, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself?
Certainly. I'll give you a little background on my career and also the experience I've had in coaching in Taekwondo. I'm a dual Canadian and American citizen, and I spent my career as a geologist, primarily in the gold mining industry, so a science background. I worked exploring for and finding and acquiring gold mines in around 20 countries around the world. Over about a 20-year period, and had enjoyed some success with that I'm very proud of. And a lot of that background is where my data analysis interests and I'll say skills have derived from. I also spent a decade as running a state geological survey, which was entirely about geological hazards like earthquakes and tsunamis, landslides, flooding, and such things. And that also, relied on that same kind of background. Around 10 years ago, I remarried to a woman named Stephanie Jones, and we were living in Las Vegas. She had a 12-year-old girl at the time who was deep in Taekwondo. She was a second-degree black belt already at that time. And so I entered that world, and Taekwondo was really our life, 7 days a week. Going to competitions, training in both our home gym as well as in the dojangs. We moved around to numerous clubs in the Vegas and Southern California area, and we ended up working with a number of fairly high-profile coaches. Jimmy Kim in California, who was working with the Lopez family, Gene, Stephen, and Diana. So we enjoyed that time. We also spent quite a bit of time in Manchester, England, with Paul Green and Gareth Brown, and also attended virtually all of their U.S. Sessions, especially in the West, where it'd be 2 or 3 days at a time. Summer, which is my daughter, she ended up wanting to go, but she didn't actually go into, but she did want to go into the U.S. Army's WCAP program, which is the World Class Athlete Program, where they have a Taekwondo presence with coaches David Bartlett and Terrence Jennings. And then finally in Las Vegas, we also did some work with Ed Givens, who's CJ Nichols' dad. And of course, he's earned a lot of credit for the tremendous Taekwondo athlete that CJ is. I started coaching about 3 years after getting together with Stephanie and Summer, and earned my black belt so I could be Summer's primary ring coach. And we did a lot of traveling domestically and internationally. We went to U.S. team trials, nationals, innumerable state and local events, G1 and G2 events like the U.S. Open, Canada Open, Costa Rica, and also the Austrian Open. You might be interested in it.
Yeah, I actually saw you in from Austrian Open. I think it was the last edition last year. You were around.
It was a couple of years ago.
A couple of years ago, yeah, and of course working with the father from Carl Allen, so from CJ, and working with Jimmy King, renowned Kirugi player. Also, at some point, Pumse head coach for US. So big names out there, and I think your experience, even though it's not a decades long like most coaches, it was pretty intense. Yeah.
Yeah, it was, and we were kind of having to do that because we were trying to be on a fast track for her to ultimately try to get to the Olympics. That didn't happen, but in 2019, she ended up being the alternate on the World University team for the U.S., the World team, the national team, and also the Pan Am Games team. So, being the alternate doesn't get you that far, but it certainly provided a lot of experience along the way for both of us.
Well, one of the things I asked you to talk about in this podcast is when I was discussing with other coaches about this IOC released framework on fairness, inclusion, non-discrimination basis of gender identity and sex variations. Of course, the fact of transgender athletes being very polemic and very discussed in many other sports like swimming or weightlifting or like at track and field. Taekwondo is not so much, but there are some regulations out there. There are some athletes out there. And it's a topic that I'm pretty sure needs to be debated for sure, and maybe informed. I think most of our listeners have never even heard about such situations. They are not so well informed. And I think you are from one of the three key points that we need to talk about when we talk about this framework, of course, being the legal or human rights issues. You being a data guy and liking to discuss this topic from the science perspective, you're someone I would like to listen to. So let's just start into it. Let's dig into it. So what are your opinions, and how do you think Taekwondo is adapting to this IOC framework? IOC, of course, International Olympic Committee.
Well, I've reviewed the WT regulations. They call it the eligibility regulations for transgender athletes, and they mimic extremely closely the IOC framework, as you described, for transgender men, which are biological women identifying as a man. All they really have to do to compete in Taekwondo is to declare in writing that they identify as a man, and WT will basically say you're good to go. So the real issue is with people that are known as transgender women, biological males, who identify as a female and are desirous of competing against biological women in the female categories. So World Taekwondo, again, follows the IOC guidelines pretty much to the letter. And what that means is, after declaring their intention to do this, the key criteria that both the IOC and WT adopted is that these people, the transgender females, need to maintain a testosterone level that is below 10 nanomoles per liter. So that's a very fancy word. I'm not going to get into that. So let's just say the unit of 10 nanomoles per liter for a period of at least 12 months. And they have to show medical records that demonstrates that to a medical team that WT has in place. So what I'd like to talk to you about is the biological basis for the physical and anatomical reasons why men have an advantage over biological women in sports in particular, and then the measures, the data, what the data says about what degree of difference that is in both normal people and elite athletes, and then finally, what are the clinical studies and evidence as to what does testosterone suppression do to performance for these people. So that's sort of a list of what I'd like to work through with you.
Yeah, well, basically, we understand in Taekwondo since the beginning. In the beginning, there were not even female competitions. In the beginning, there were only male divisions. And then it's identified that there are big differences between male and female. That's why the genders compete in two different categories, not only in Kirugi, but also in the forms division. So as many of the sports out there, there are male and female divisions where of course, genetics create an advantage or a difference of performance. And in Taekwondo, has not been much different. It is a combat sport. It is a power sport. And in my opinion, there is a difference between male ability to produce power and force, and the female. Therefore, even if the same weight mass, the mass is the same, the power outputs are not the same. So I understand why there are male and female divisions, and also why there are weight divisions. So the fact that there is a transition between biological male to female, it's, well, from a scientific perspective, it's quite intriguing. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's I've done a fair bit of reading on this and read through a number of papers, and there is a definitive document that most sports are now relying on. It was published. It was a scientific paper published in December 2020 in the journal Sports Medicine. And it's by the authors Hilton and Lundberg. And, if people are interested, maybe you can attach that reference afterwards. But I'll be quoting statistics and data and conclusions from that report. And other sports are using the same studies for their decision making. So it starts with, like you mentioned, genetics. There are an estimated 6,500 genes that are differentially expressed between males and females. And there are 3,000, if you can believe it, 3,000 sex-specific differences in skeletal construction, bone density, and muscle. So those things add up to those kind of differences and advantages that we've hinted at. And there's been a number of studies of school-aged children. In Greece, they've studied 6-year-olds and 6-year-old boys and 6-year-old girls. And they found, this is pre-puberty, of course, they found that males were able to do more shuttle runs, so sort of speed events, about 17% more than females, and they can jump 10% further. The Australians have studied 85,000 children ages 9 to 17. And with the 9-year-olds, again, the same kind of numbers come out. The boys are 10% faster in sprints, 17% faster at the mile, and 10%, again, jumping further. They can do 33% more push-ups in 30 seconds, and they have a much stronger grip, about 15% stronger grip. And that's for children pre-adolescence. And adolescence is when testosterone explodes in biological males, and their levels in boys increases at least 20 times that of girls, and actually it can be up to 100 times higher in teenagers.
Of course,
So
testosterone being, of course, a hormone that directly impacts muscle growth. So therefore, it's so important.
Exactly, you're right. You're right on the money with that. Muscle mass goes up, strength goes up, hemoglobin processing goes up, and that's something that people don't really think about. Is that VO2 max is actually much higher, about 50% higher in most males than it is in females. So that's yet another advantage. And one thing I'd like to point out is that in addition to the skeletal and muscle mass issues, males have stiffer connective tissue. So think of tendons, and that creates greater force. It's probably not a surprise for people that have seen boys and girls starting out in Taekwondo and Pumse in particular. Girls just seem to have a natural ability to stretch better than boys, and that's related to this stiffer connective tissue that creates, again, greater force and leverage for males.
Of course, and stiffness as well of the tendons are directly related to power outputs and reactive strengths. Yes,
right. And along the numbers for those reactive strengths, and this is in moderately trained males. We're going to have these next numbers come out, males and females, and so males have about 45% more lean body mass and muscle mass. Their muscle strength is about 57% higher. Their knee extension force, again, critical for Taekwondo, 54% higher. And then the tendon properties, here are the actual numbers, 83% higher force and 41% higher stiffness. And then finally, VO2 max is 50% higher, like I think I mentioned, for males, and pulmonary ventilation almost the same at 48%. So all these things add up to the differences in sports that are quite interesting between males and females.
So as I mentioned before, I think Taekwondo is a power sport. Does power sport have a different impact? How is the power outputs on boys and girls on those studies? Is it measured? How does WT interpret Taekwondo and in terms of sports characteristics, sports analysis?
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned WT. I'll get right back to your earlier parts of the question. But WT makes an interesting statement in their anti-doping reports that they put out, where they say that the basis for doping in Taekwondo is they start with the presumption that Taekwondo is not either a power or endurance sport, which is a surprise to me.
Well, the rules change so much that maybe the definition of the sport can change a little bit, but I think it was always a power sport. And the new rules make it probably more endurance than it was a couple of years ago. I do understand where they're going through with the doping, because most of the doping situations we have in Taekwondo are not with related with VO2 max or related with power resistance. It's mostly about diuretics and weight control substances.
Certainly. And so your question earlier really was about, what might the differences the data show for differences in the power sports for different athletes. And so I've got some of those data for powerlifting, for weightlifting at the same weight. And so the Olympic categories, several of the weight classes for men and women are actually either the same number in kilograms or within one or two. And men can lift 30% more than women at the same weight. So there's a good example right there. The same paper that I've referenced, they look into measuring elite athletes. And so elite athletes, and so we're talking about, people that go to all the big G events in Taekwondo, they found that the vertical jump in general is a third higher for elite men over elite women. But that goes up for combat sports, where it's greater than 40%. So again, a massive difference. And this actually shows up when you look at schoolboy records, 14 and 15-year-olds versus the world record times in track and field. And so, for example, there are, and this statistic just floored me, there are 10,000 males that have personal best 100-meter times that are faster than the current world record holder woman. So 10,000 versus the best ever. And then these same those are, of course, adults and people going to the Olympics and Worlds. Schoolboys, again, for 100 meters, a 15-year-old schoolboy record is 10.2 seconds in 100 meters versus 10.49 for the world record female. The long jump, again, same thing, 15-year-old, 7.85 meters for the male, 7.52 world record female. And then here's a power example, the discus. A 15-year-old schoolboy record is 77.68 meters. And again, the female record is 76.8. So again, shortly after puberty, males basically demonstrate superior athletic performance to world record holder females.
That's good in identifying, of course, what with numbers being realistic about something that is most. I hate the word common sense, because there's no such thing as common sense. There's knowledge, and there is inherited knowledge or transmitted knowledge. So we know that men and boys are stronger and faster than girls at the same age. But we're talking not about the issue of boys competing against females, because they are different gender divisions in Taekwondo. We're talking about athletes that transition to another gender. And with all what are the current regulations on that? Then it's the 10 millimoles per liter of testosterone level on the blood. Those are the requirements for the transgender athletes on the maximum cap, on their maximum threshold. What is on the boy, on an elite male athlete in a senior division? What would their normal testosterone levels be? If we say that the transgender are limited to 10, how much is a normal, non-transitioned male? And what is also the standard for a the average female athlete?
Great question. That is actually a superb question, because the normal range for Olympic male athletes is from 7 to just under 30 nanomoles per liter. So they're actually setting this so-called standard within the normal range of Olympic athlete testosterone levels. So 7 to 30 versus 10. So for some of these Olympic athletes, if they chose to, they almost don't even have to do testosterone suppression to actually meet this standard. And so, whereas females, the average numbers range from 0 actually to less than 2, about 1.7 nanomoles per liter. So you can see that the standard is more than 5 times higher than the top end range for female levels. And not all sports are following the 10 rule, but that's what the IOC and WT are following. Track and field has gone down to 5, and they're actually circulating conversation right now to make a decision next month to reduce it to 2.5. And so that's all those numbers. But the real question is, does testosterone suppression to any level, including down to 1 or lower, what does that do to male performance?
And is the testosterone the only indicator, or should we also be looking at other indicators?
There is reference to perhaps including other measures. I'm not knowledgeable about what those are. Everyone is talking about and restricted to testosterone levels at this time.
Okay, so the current regulations now say that if you are transitioning and doing hormone suppression therapy for, you said 10 months, that's what you said before, and they reduce that for the previous 10 months, they have to always be measured at under 10, or just you started the hormone suppression therapy and then on the competition you have less than 10? How does it really work?
Well, it's for 12 months, a minimum of 12 months. And with the cocktails that are taken for this testosterone suppression, my reading of it is that it very rapidly reduces testosterone levels to perhaps 1. And so that just takes a matter of a few months. And so with ongoing chemical suppression, it is not difficult to get the numbers below 10 and down into the female range. But again, the real question is, what difference does that make in terms of those people's performance in athletics?
So you mentioned that bone density, tendon stiffness, tendon strength was 50% higher or even higher on the pre-puberty athletes, male athletes, and actually pre-puberty males in general, the population. Do the hormone suppression therapy will reduce their acquired pre-adolescent or adolescent gains on the muscle growth, bone density, tendon strength, and stiffness?
Those are perfect questions. The testosterone suppression is successful. However, the studies show that, and these are studies of actual transgender women who have had their health monitored very carefully over extended periods. And so I'll lay out for you the kind of findings of those longitudinal studies, they call them, which are basically just time series measurements of the same individuals. And so for as far as the skeletal parameters go, they remain basically unaltered. Bone mass density for transgender women is preserved for a median of 12.5 years. So the 1 or 2 or 3 year period is kind of irrelevant as far as the bone mass issue goes. And in some cases, they're finding that these are just normal transgender women. Athletic women actually show an increase in bone density. So there's still the advantages that the male skeleton and muscles advantage. We're talking about the skeleton right now. And there's even some protection in the design of the male body that results in fewer knee injuries. So I don't understand the whole mechanics of that, but that's the findings. Muscle mass, after 1 to 3 years of suppression, after 1 year, with again testosterone dropping all the way down to 1, they've used MRIs to study the thigh muscles sequentially over time. and they find that after 1 year, the cross-sectional area of a thigh muscle is down by 9%, and after 3 years, it's down a total of 13%. And so, and then lean muscle mass goes down between 3 and 5% overall. And so the muscle mass advantage is not removed whatsoever. And there's still an advantage of 30, 40 or more percent, depending on which criteria one wants to look at. So for example, hand grip, there's still a retained 23% retained advantage. And knee extension and knee flexion, comparable to baseline information, is still a 50% advantage. And so the conclusion is that training during suppression not only counteracts muscle loss, but can actually increase mass and strength.
Those are interesting and some, I would say, even worrisome athletes if facts and figures that I didn't even know about. I'm so happy to have you here because, to be fair, I never spent so much time about the transgender issue in Taekwondo. I've been reading, of course, and all the debates and following up the debates on transgender athletes across the board on other sports. But in Taekwondo, it's not something that I would pay too close attention to. How many athletes are out there competing at elite level that are transgender athletes that you know about?
Well, of course, that the WT keeps that information private for medical privacy issues. That's perfectly understandable. So we don't have any actual data. WT does, and perhaps USAT and other national bodies might have some information on that. But it's not public information. And so what we're discovering and finding is that people that report Taekwondo information over time are actually revealing that there are cases where biological males who, for example, went to cadet worlds and competed at that high level are now showing up as in the women's category, where they're fighting in weight classes like minus 57 and minus 67 kilograms. So there is an example, and perhaps examples of this occurring right at this time.
Yeah. The good thing with the internet is that people started to create databases, and of course, with databases, you keep adding data, and you kept, as you mentioned, longitudinal studies. We keep track over time about the performance of coaches, players, even referees. So I've seen also because other people pointed out, you pointed out to me on the conversations we had prior to recording this podcast, we've seen athletes competing in cadet males, getting world championship medals, then progressing to female divisions and quite rapidly achieving impressive results, even competing at Grand Prix.
Yes, Grand Prix, and actually at Worlds last year, and now showing up in G2 events, G1 and G2 events. Recently at Fujairah, if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yeah, Fujairah, yes.
Fujairah, and also coming up at the U.S. Open and the Belgian Open later on. So it may be important for biological females to do their own research and find out who they're fighting, especially if it's somebody who seems to have come out of nowhere and all of a sudden is in the upper ranks of their echelon. Well,
we have, of course, some cases that doesn't mean that they transgendered to a female division. With China, we had an athlete last year that got 500 points in a season. I think the virtually the maximum points you are able to gather in one season. But yes, those are the extraordinary athletes, not the abnormal athletes that would get those results. So, do you think it's the athletes competing in the female division that transition from a male gender division, are they in such a big advantage towards the top athletes based on the numbers you just quoted?
Well, I think the numbers are pretty undeniable. The anatomical and muscular and tendon advantages are not lost, and those are all features that are prominent in today's fighting style. I've watched one match where this was occurring, and it certainly appeared to me that the world class top 10 ranked female athlete was being pushed around pretty easily by this person who was the same weight. The top 10 female actually won the match just barely, but it was an eye opener.
We're talking about science-based reasons why male transitioning to female are in a big advantage, and put the biological females in a inferiority position or in a big disadvantage. There's also the matter of the fairness and the human rights. Aren't these athletes allowed to compete in the gender that they are identifying with? Because human rights and the fact that the athletes have the right to compete is not transitioning to the identity or to the gender that they identify to the correct solution. Do you see any other solutions?
Well, yes. I add to your succinct summary of the sort of social issue. The IOC, their position, and this is a quote, they say, "It is necessary to ensure insofar as possible that trans athletes are not excluded from the opportunity to participate in sporting competition." But they go on to say the overriding sporting objective is and remains the guarantee of fair competition. And of course, in combat sports, it's fair and safe. And so that's where certain sports, the only one that's really taken the lead on this, you mentioned swimming, but rugby has taken a very similar approach that FINA, the World Aquatic Body, did. And they've put out recently a policy guideline document on transgender women in their sport. And they've adopted a policy that's very similar to FINA, the swimming people, and that is that they don't allow transgender women to compete in female rugby at all, with one exception, and that is if these transgender women actually transitioned as children, pre-puberty, and did not experience the biological effects of puberty and adolescence, and therefore they can play. But they have to have the medical records and data that support that. And of course, pre-puberty means before 12 years old. That's the definition they use. So 11 and under. And it's actually, my understanding is it's actually illegal in most countries for anyone under 14 to do any transitioning. So
I read in the news there are some countries approved now the gender transition at the age of 12, but I think most countries don't even allow them as underage. And we're talking about a worldwide sport. Taekwondo is practiced 200 regions and countries. So in virtually every Olympic nation, with the exception of North Korea. So the fact that players are not allowed to transition as underage, and if you create a regulation that does not allow them to compete if they didn't transition before the age of 12, basically we're denying these people their human right of competing.
Right, and that's one perspective, and looking at it from one direction, and I'm not denying that that's true. But FINA put out a policy document on what they did, and they formed study groups, including athlete, medical, and then also legal and human rights group, comprised of legal experts in sex discrimination and human rights, like you're referring to. And they came out that, and here's their summary. They say the task of the legal and human rights group was to reflect FINA's commitment to a sex-based women's category as necessary to ensure that FINA does not discriminate against female athletes. And so their perspective is, well, we don't want to discriminate against biological females. And yeah, it'd be great if these other people had their own way to compete. Perhaps it should be an open category. Perhaps that's an approach that could be taken.
Well, we'll take a little break, have some water. You've been talking a lot, and then we'll come back after our little commercial break. Because if you're listening, listen to the commercials. Our sponsors are not some random advertising platform. Our sponsors are equipment that are there to help the top practitioner. It's equipment that I use in the club, the equipment that I support, and I'm very happy that they are supporting us with sponsoring this podcast. So stay there.
The newest tool out there for Taekwondo studios is the 2020 Armor scoring system. 2020 Armor was founded in 2016 with the mission to enhance the way martial artists train, compete, and engage with the sport through the development of innovative products. The sports technology company has developed martial arts scoring equipment and software, transforming martial arts into a mainstream professional sport like soccer. The company's flagship product tracks impacts through a vest and headgear that shows the score on the vest itself using scoring from popular video games. Customers include the most prominent martial art clubs in the world. The founders and investors of 2020 Armor are former professional martial art athletes. IEAD Sports, founded by the family members of Adidas, is a significant investor. 2020 Armor's mission is to inspire people to fall in love with martial arts. Through the development of the UBL, the United Battle League, and 2020 Armor, the plan is to bridge the tech gap some combat sports are being made to face. Step up your game with 2020 Armor.
This podcast is supported by Hawken Dynamics. Hawken Dynamics believes that technology is most useful when it stays out of your way. That's why Hawken developed the world's first wireless force plate system with extreme usability. It is the quickest, easiest to use, and most robust solution on the market. It is trusted by all sports organizations large and small, as well as tactical, military, and rehabilitation environments around the globe. It's force testing in the palm of your hand. Here at Taekwondo Center, we use Hawken Dynamics to test and monitor our team. The cloud-based platform allows us to access data and publish a variety of reports on the go. My favorites are trend reports and, of course, weight reports, where I can monitor different metrics to view progress and identify performance indicators, or to compare weights to a baseline data range. I use it on a daily basis to identify readiness. A simple jumping test takes me less than a minute to assess the entire team. Having my own Hawken Dynamics force plates allows me to test reactive strengths, maximum strengths, rate of force development, asymmetry, and so much more. The real-time feedback on the app is useful not only for testing, but as a training tool, making it more accurate and at the same time more engaging for the athletes. If you are interested in learning more about Hawken Dynamics or getting your own, the team can be reached at info@hawkendynamics.com or on Instagram or Twitter @HawkenDynamics.
This podcast is sponsored by First Beat Sports. First Beat Sports combines the most comprehensive analytics in team sports with a customizable interface to support real-time monitoring, recovery monitoring, performance management, and much more. The result? Data-driven decisions that support your athletes and team training, recovery, and performance goals. First Beat Sports is trusted by professionals. Over 23,000 athletes representing over 1,000 teams around the world rely on the solution to train and plan with confidence on a team and individual level using HRV-based insights. For more information, please visit our website, firstbeat.com/sports.
You're listening to the Taekwondo Podcast. Now, back to your host, César Valentim.
So welcome back. We've been talking with Don Luis about transgender athletes and the impact of gender transitioning into combat sports. Don, we've talked about some of the science behind it, and we talked about the differences between male and female genetic differences. And what do you see in terms of safety for the players, especially the players that are in the female division when they're getting matched against an athlete that transitioned?
Well, it's again, FINA and World Rugby both address this as well, and they come out and say that the separate sex competition is necessary to attain their objectives, which includes fairness and physical safety, even in swimming, and competitive advantages. And that's further, and also to develop the sport and promote its appeal and commercial value. So safety is a big part of what they're talking about, and it's driving all of World Rugby's decision making. And rugby is a collision sport, and they're of athletes of different sizes. So they go into great length. They have numerous pages describing their findings and recommendations for safety in female rugby, and they conclusively come down that it's just not on. They're not going to allow these generally larger and definitely stronger at any size, stronger, more durable, less even prone to injury transgender women into rugby. And they've, again, recommended open categories. I can only conclude that Taekwondo, as a not so much a collision sport, but a combat sport, and we all know what's involved with that. There's a tremendous amount of power involved with body kicks and also head kicks. I saw Cheek Cece knock out Mardani at the Grand Prix final because Mardani wasn't really paying attention. He thought the referee was going to stop the match. And in the blink of an eye, he got knocked out. And Mardani is like 6'5" and 250 pounds. So that's at the top end of an example. But I can only imagine what might happen if an elite male of the same age and size and weight as an elite female got into a Taekwondo match. I don't believe it's going to be either fair or safe, and definitely not a close result.
As far as I recall, FINA has the open divisions, but those open divisions do not qualify for Olympic Games or World Championships. Is that the fact? That
is true. They've talked about open divisions, but I don't believe that they've actually formalized that. And rugby is the same. They have not. They're only allowing transgender women to play in mixed gender, non-contact rugby. So in other words, kind of like flag football. But even flag football, you can have quite a bit of contact. So they're saying no contact.
So you think Taekwondo should go through that approach of creating open divisions for those for the ranked events, create a separate ranking division for the open classes? Would we have enough athletes for those groups for an open division or for an open gender category, or should we just create more regulations to allow the transition athletes to compete in the genders that they identify to, or ban them altogether? That's, of course, is a very personal opinion based on the science that you have. We mentioned the human rights, but I think we can interview other people in another opportunity for about those things. So just I'm interviewing Don Lewis. So Don, what's your opinion?
Certainly, and we base this all on IOC guidelines, and IOC actually in 2021 came out with new proposals, not actual guidelines, but proposals as to how to approach this. And they came right out and they denied that there is a difference, a performance difference between males and females. The IOC did that. And they also said, hey, let's get away from testosterone as a measure. And so these are sort of ideas that they were throwing out. And the reaction was swift and fierce. Sports medicine came out and said, in nice language, you're crazy. There is a preponderance of data that shows that males have this advantage that doesn't go away after transitioning, and it's just not safe or fair for biological females. And then FINA said that it's discrimination against them. So FINA and World Rugby have made a proposal for open categories. I would like to see World Taekwondo adopt the same policy, although it still offends me that someone would transition a child. That just sounds like horrific abuse to me personally. And so that's why it's typically more like a adult that does transitioning. But again, that still involves an advantage. So, as a first step, I'd like to see World Taekwondo adopt the similar policies that FINA, which is World Aquatics, and Rugby have put out there. I think they are the leading edge of how to deal with this dynamic and somewhat controversial social issue, and start with that, and perhaps create an open category. As you hinted, I do not see the numbers supporting at any event enough athletes to have a fair competition. But perhaps, I don't know. There was a time when, before the para programs came along, that people would say, well, there aren't going to be enough para athletes. But, that's been proven true. There are many para athletes who are performing supremely well, and they're now part of the Olympics and many other events.
Well, basically, the Paralympic program in Taekwondo grew when we got enough players, and especially when we in 2015, when we got accepted and integrated into the Tokyo Paralympics, we saw many nations jumping into the Para Taekwondo program and bringing their athletes on board, increasing, of course, the athletes pool. We have a great number of athletes now. They decreased a little bit to the pandemic and the lack of events, but I'm pretty sure they will grow again. We were confirmed as the Paralympic sport for Paris and for Los Angeles, so it's going to be quite a big competition on the para athletes. But in terms of for my personal world, and I live in Western Europe in a civilized country that has no issues with the transgenders or with all kinds of social implications from it. They have the amazing rights, and still I don't know too many people who transition from male to female. I actually know a couple of who transition from female to male, and of course there is a biological disadvantage, but it has to do with how late they start the transition, how long I've been doing the transition. In Taekwondo, the question that triggers me right now on my mind is the 10 millimole too high? Would it be more reasonable to have 1 millimole or 2 millimole, or not at all?
I don't think it matters whatsoever. The scientific data, medical data, shows that dropping very quickly down to 1, which is halfway in the female range, makes no difference really. A 5% difference, or maybe 10% at the most, in strength and power. So males still have a 30-40% difference, so advantage. So I think they need to get away from the testosterone thing, as long as it's not just abandoning the whole subject of using something to justify separate categories. So again, I prefer the FINA and World Rugby approach of that's not enough. It's not really relevant. And there needs to be a separate category.
When we talk about the transgender athletes, it also comes a lot to discussion, especially in some African countries. Some track and field players were forbidden to compete because of their high testosterone levels, even though they were biological females. Not transitioning, they had some biological, anthropometric, and hormonal levels that put them out of the range. You see that in Taekwondo happening? Do you think we should also be testing the female athletes that show abnormal hormone parameters?
I don't know. I'm aware of those cases, and those people, at birth were identified as having some of those descriptors that you threw out there, that then ultimately led to them having advantages in sort of the middle distance events. And that's where track is really kind of focused, is on those athletes. And then that, I think it's the 400 to 1600 meter range. They haven't even addressed it for the sprints or the marathon. And so they're still wrestling with it. I'm not a big advocate of over-regulating anything. So I have a difficult time supporting the notion of, well, we need to measure, we need to test, we need to sample everybody all the time. I think that's a human rights violation. So that's just my opinion. I'd be open to anyone else's opinion on this.
Well, everyone has their advantage in Taekwondo. Height is a big advantage. Muscle mass, or the number of fast twitch fibers in your body will, of course, be a deciding factor in the sport that you do. So the same as for other sports, if you have more muscle types that will allow you to have a slow twitch, long endurance fibers will bring you an advantage to marathon. So I think genetical advantages, as long as they're not manipulated, and people are talking about using CRISPR and all those other genetic manipulation, gene manipulation technology to do that pre-birth, prenatal manipulation. As long as we don't do that, I'm quite okay with those advantages, because they are natural. If you were born with that advantage, you were born an athlete, this should not be taken away from you. But do you think that the case now, going back to the transgender issues, that's going to be expanding, especially because in US you see a lot of teenagers doing early transitioning? It's because, of course, they identify with another gender, they have the acceptance, and it's these days more socially accepted, even if there's doubts and it can be even questionable, and it can be from different interpretations, can be empowered or banned or even discriminated. You think that transgender issue is going to be a raising issue, especially, let's maybe not talk about the world, but talk about US? You think it's going to be a issue that will be dealing just 1 or 2 years up the road?
I don't think so. I believe that it's my view that there's a purposeful agenda starting in schools and throughout seemingly the United States, where there's a strong advocacy for encouraging these impressionable youth to take action. Sometimes it might even involve surgery. And there's now cases coming out where people deeply regret that they ever did it, and are looking to sue their parents, their teachers, their doctors and physicians. And so it's a big, big bomb of an issue that I don't see going away anytime soon in the United States. I think it's still the conversation so far has been mostly about how do we welcome and frankly encourage these people and welcome them into all parts of society, including athletics. But the consequences for those individuals and for the sports, let's say, like Taekwondo, those things have not really been thought through. So I think it's still a growing issue. It's not going away anytime soon. And over the next 5 years, we might look like dinosaurs, because it's evolved and advanced to a whole new level.
Well, the question of human rights and the fact that the athletes have the right to identify themselves and to have a healthy life with the identity that they choose, and at the same time promote sports fairness. Apparently, it's conflicting situations right now. Probably there will be some testing panels. There will be some other solutions in the future that will allow it to be less complicated for these situations to be resolved. And thank you very much for your time, Don. It was something that is definitely an eye-opener, this episode. As I mentioned to you off record, it's the episode that's going to get this podcast cancelled. But it's I would love to interview someone on the human rights perspective on this. I'm pretty sure that someone will reach out, and we'll have in the future another chance to talk about transgender athletes in Taekwondo, and from a medical perspective, from a human perspective, from a social perspective. But it was very interesting to see it from a parent, from a coach, from someone that likes data, from a scientific review of the publications out there. Every day we'll have new publications. This team can be revisited again. And well, thank you very much for your time. Is there anything else you would like to leave as a message with?
Thank you, César. It's been a blast. I'd like to talk to you further at some point, either in person or again a session like this about other kinds of data. Everybody in the Pan Americas is all fluffed up today because of the ETU saying they're going to have all 16 divisions at the European Games.
Yes, exactly. We have them.
So I've had a lot of messages today about people saying, "What the F is going on here?" So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, well, the European Games will have, it's a big victory for ETU. They got all the 16 divisions inside. So we have 8 weight divisions in male, 8 weight divisions in female, top 13 qualifying directly by the December ranking, plus one more being qualified by a qualification tournament in April in Bucharest. We have also a host country, Poland, with 16 athletes qualified directly, plus the wild cards for refugees and others. So it's going to be a lot of points. It's a G4 event. I know it's not fair for the African games, for the Asian games, or for the Pan Am games that only qualify. But I don't think it's well, it's not a problem for us on this side of the pond. It's for you guys for weren't able to push the world divisions into your Olympic continental event. So. Good on ETU. And again, I keep saying ETU has some very smart people. Pan Am has currently some of the best organization in terms of continental unions. Asia has some very good leadership as well. Africa has an amazing leadership now with the new board members. I love General Ahmed, of course. He was a good friend, and I mourn his passing and my sincere condolences to his family. But I'm nice to see some of the African leadership taking these advantages, and I hope they follow up and get those continental games also bumped to 16 weight divisions. And sure, those and other data I'm always welcome to discuss. As you know, this is a podcast that talks a lot about data points, about sports science, data and technology. It is something that I'm very fond of, and thank you very much for being available. Definitely on my guest list. Thank you for this episode. See you then in another episode then.
Thank you, César.
Thank you, Don. It was a pleasure being here with you and with everyone who's listening. This was the Taekwondo Podcast. If you haven't already, listen to our other episodes that are available wherever you listen to your podcasts. We are releasing new episodes every Tuesday. Stay tuned, subscribe to the podcast, leave us a positive review, and share it with your friends. See you next time.
You've been listening to the Taekwondo Podcast, keeping the fans, coaches, and high-performance athletes up to date with the latest news and trends on Olympic Taekwondo. Your host, Coach César Valentim, has almost 20 years of experience with high-performance Taekwondo and has worked all around the world as a Taekwondo trainer. We hope you enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review, and we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, find us on Instagram at Taekwondo Podcast, on Facebook at Taekwondo Cast, and the website taekwondopodcast.com. See you next time.